Imagine facing an enemy so powerful, so vast, that it seemed like nothing could stand in its way. The mighty Ottoman Empire, under the command of Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, had already swept across Europe, leaving devastation in its wake. Yet, against all odds, a small principality in Eastern Europe, led by an extraordinary leader, stood up and delivered one of the greatest defeats the empire would ever face. This is the forgotten story of the Battle of Vaslui, a battle that would echo through history, changing the fate of an entire region. The genius behind it? A ruler whose name still strikes fear into the hearts of invaders, Stephen III of Moldavia, known as Stephen the Great. But how did this tiny state, outnumbered and surrounded by enemies, manage to defeat the unstoppable Ottoman forces? Stay with us as we dive deep into the cunning strategies, the audacious bravery, and the brutal realities of the Battle of Vaslui, where one man's defiance would forever alter the course of history. Chapter 1: The Calm Before the Storm. Our story begins in the heart of Moldavia, a landlocked principality in Eastern Europe, surrounded by powerful neighbors like Hungary, Poland, and the vast Ottoman Empire. In the mid-15th century, Stephen III had ascended to the throne of Moldavia, a land often caught in the crossfire of larger empires. For Stephen, the Ottomans were not just another adversary, they were a colossal threat to Moldavia's very existence. Sultan Mehmed II, fresh from his conquest of Constantinople, now turned his eyes toward the small but strategic territories of Moldavia. Controlling Moldavia would give the Ottomans access to the Black Sea ports and strengthen their grip on Eastern Europe. But for Stephen, this was not merely a political struggle, it was a fight for survival. Moldavia stood as the last bastion of defense between the Ottomans and the Christian kingdoms of Europe. If Moldavia fell, the gates to Europe would swing wide open. Chapter 2: A Nation on Edge. By the winter of 1474, the tension had reached its boiling point. Mehmed II had dispatched one of his most trusted generals, Hatem Suleiman Pasha, to lead an army against Moldavia. Estimates of the Ottoman forces vary, but they were believed to number between 30,000 and a staggering 120,000 men. These were battle-hardened soldiers, elite janissaries, heavy cavalry, and archers, all experienced in warfare and ready to crush any resistance. Stephen, on the other hand, had only around 40,000 troops. But Moldavia's army wasn't made up of mere peasants, it was a mix of Moldavian soldiers, elite heavy cavalry, light cavalry, and even mercenaries from Hungary and Poland. Still, they were vastly outnumbered. Stephen III knew he couldn't afford to face the Ottomans in open battle, doing so would be suicide. But he had a different kind of weapon up his sleeve: the land itself. The harsh winter, the mountainous terrain, and the dense forests of Moldavia would become his greatest allies. Stephen devised a bold plan, a plan that would turn the very ground beneath the Ottoman army into a death trap. Chapter 3: The Scorched Earth. As the Ottoman army marched into Moldavia, they found nothing but desolation. Villages had been abandoned, crops burned, and wells poisoned. Stephen had enacted a scorched earth policy, leaving the Ottomans without food or water in the freezing winter. But Stephen's strategy didn't end there. He set up ambushes along the Ottoman army's path, harassing them day and night with hit-and-run tactics, using light cavalry to harass their flanks. Every day, the Ottoman army grew more exhausted, their supplies dwindling. The harsh winter, the hunger, and the constant ambushes wore down the mighty Ottoman force. Yet, they pressed on, determined to crush the Moldavian resistance. The decisive moment was fast approaching. Chapter 4: The Battle of Vaslui begins. On the cold, misty morning of January 10, 1475, the Ottoman army reached the valley near Vaslui. This valley, surrounded by steep hills and thick forests, would become the site of their greatest defeat. Stephen had chosen this location carefully. It was a natural choke point, where the Ottomans would be forced to funnel their massive army across a narrow wooden bridge. The marshy terrain would restrict their movement, and the dense fog would hide the Moldavian forces lying in wait. Then, the battle began. Moldavian musicians, drummers and buglers, started playing, sending echoes across the valley. To the Ottomans, it sounded like the entire Moldavian army was waiting for them on the other side of the fog. In reality, only a fraction of Stephen's forces were visible. Believing they were about to engage the full Moldavian army, Suleiman Pasha ordered his troops forward. As they moved deeper into the valley, the Moldavian artillery opened fire. Cannons, archers, and musketeers unleashed a devastating barrage on the advancing Ottomans. Chapter 5: The Fog of War. The fog worked in Stephen's favor. Ottoman soldiers, unable to see their enemies, marched blindly into a deadly trap. Arrows rained down from the hills, cannons boomed from hidden positions, and Moldavian cavalry launched hit-and-run attacks, luring the Ottomans further into the marsh. The wooden bridge over the Barlad River, weakened by the Moldavians, collapsed under the weight of Ottoman soldiers, sending hundreds plunging into the icy water. Those who survived the artillery barrage and didn't drown in the river faced another horror: the Moldavian heavy cavalry, charging down from the hills. The Ottomans were trapped, their forces split, and their morale shattered. But Suleiman Pasha, desperate to regain control, ordered his reserves forward. It was a fatal mistake. Chapter 6: Stephen's Decisive Blow. As the Ottoman reserves marched into the valley, Stephen launched his final attack. From all sides, Moldavian troops surged forward, cutting down the exhausted Ottoman soldiers. The confusion was complete. Ottoman buglers, disoriented by the fog, sounded retreat signals, further plunging the army into chaos. For 4 days, the Moldavians pursued the fleeing Ottomans, driving them out of Moldavia and all the way to the town of Isaxia on the Danube. By the end of the battle, an estimated 45,000 Ottoman soldiers lay dead. It was one of the most catastrophic defeats the Ottoman Empire had ever suffered. Chapter 7: The Aftermath and Legacy. The victory at Vaslui wasn't just a military triumph, it was a message to the world. Stephen III had done what many thought was impossible: he had defeated the might of the Ottoman Empire. His victory sent shockwaves across Europe. Pope Sixtus IV hailed Stephen as the Athleta Christi, champion of Christ, for defending the Christian world from the Ottoman advance. Even Mehmed II, the feared Sultan, was stunned into silence upon hearing of the defeat. But the victory came at a cost. Stephen knew that the Ottomans would return with an even larger force, and Moldavia's struggle for survival was far from over. Chapter 8: A Hero's Legacy. Stephen's victory at Vaslui was one of many battles in his long struggle against the Ottomans. He continued to defend Moldavia for decades, building monasteries to commemorate his victories, including the famed Voronezh Monastery, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site 5 source. Though Stephen's reign was filled with hardship, he remains one of the greatest military leaders of his time, remembered for his bravery, his cunning, and his unwavering devotion to Moldavia. The Battle of Vaslui serves as a reminder that even the smallest nations can achieve the greatest victories when led by a brilliant strategist with an unbreakable will. It was a moment when courage triumphed over might, when a single man's defiance changed the course of history. The Battle of Vaslui may not be as well known as other great battles, but it exemplifies the strength of dedication and planning. Stephen III's victory was more than a military win, it was a moment of defiance that changed the destiny of Eastern Europe. If you enjoyed this dive into history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more stories of epic battles and unsung heroes. Let us know in the comments which battle or historical figure you'd like us to cover next.